Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving deep into a stack of sources that really zero in on the intense competition heating up in the world of data platforms.
Yeah, we're focusing quite a bit on the strategic moves of the big players, Snowflake and Databricks. But it really is bigger than just their rivalry, isn't it?
Absolutely. The material also gets into the whole landscape of vendor lock-in and, maybe most importantly, how controlling your data is just becoming the central challenge, especially as everyone scrambles to, well, get AI right.
Right. So our mission with this deep dive is to pull out the most important insights, understand the key battlegrounds. We're talking data formats, governance catalogs, all those new AI capabilities, and really try to figure out what this whole high-stakes game means for you, trying to navigate this pretty complex space.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting for me. These sources, they paint this picture of like value shifting dramatically under the surface. We're seeing tactical acquisitions happening fast and this fundamental debate playing out about what open even means anymore in the data world.
Exactly. It's become a bit of a strategic term itself.
Okay, let's dive in. So, setting the scene, it's clear data is more critical than ever, right? Especially for AI. But the problem for most places is that data is scattered all over, stuck in silos.
Right. And a major trend the sources point to, sort of countering that, is this push towards a more open model. The core idea is actually pretty simple, but powerful. You control your data, and you should be able to bring different compute engines, the tools that actually process and analyze the data to your data, instead of being forced to constantly copy and move these huge data sets into one specific vendor system.
Okay, and the shift, the sources say, is changing where the point of control really lies. Traditionally, that was the database management system, right? The DBMS held the keys, read-write control.
Exactly. But now, that critical point of control, the sources argue it's shifting. It's moving to the governance catalog.
The governance catalog.
Yeah, think of it like the master index or maybe the control plane for your entire data estate. It manages access and understanding, kind of regardless of where the data physically lives or even what format it's in.
So the database engine, the DBMS, it still does the actual reading and writing, the heavy lifting.
Sure, yeah.
But the strategic value, where the vendors are really focusing, is moving. It's consolidating around the tools, the workflows, even the AI stuff being built on top of this governance catalog.
That's what the sources suggest, yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to be the fundamental shift driving this whole strategic battle we're seeing unfold.
Okay, so if the catalog is the new linchpin, how are the big players reacting?
Well, Databricks was pretty early here. They announced their Unity catalog back in 2023. That was basically them planting their flag saying, look, the catalog is the new center of gravity.
Okay, Databricks stakes out the catalog space. What was Snowflake's response then, according to the sources?
Snowflake, more recently, responded by open sourcing its Polaris technical metadata catalog.
Polaris.
Yeah, and that was seen as a move to offer a genuinely open alternative, at least for that underlying technical organization of the data.
But then Databricks came back with a pretty big counter move, didn't
Oh, yeah. Acquiring Tabular, that was huge.
a company founded by the original creators of Iceberg.
Exactly. And then right after that, they announced they were open sourcing parts of Unity catalog.
Now, that open sourcing of Unity, that raised some eyebrows, didn't it? One source mentioned that at first it was only a relatively small chunk of code, like 4,000 lines or something.
That's correct. And that specific number, yeah, it led to some debate in the sources, questions about, the extent of Databricks' immediate commitment versus the strategic intent behind the announcement.
And how does that compare to Snowflake's Polaris move?
Well, it contrasts a bit because Snowflake positioned Polaris as a fully open source technical catalog right from the start.
Though it's important to note, Snowflake also has its proprietary Horizon catalog, which is not open source.
Right. And Horizon is really crucial because that's what lets Snowflake kind of federate governance with Polaris. It aims to give you unified governance, but for both native Snowflake data and Iceberg data. Critically, though, it's unified governance within the Snowflake ecosystem.
Ah, okay. So unified, but inside their walls.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The sources noted that third parties could read Snowflake-managed Iceberg data, but writing to it from outside Snowflake wasn't quite as straightforward.
Okay, this feels like it ties directly into that other big battle, the data formats themselves, Delta Lake versus Apache Iceberg.
Exactly. Delta Lake is Databricks' default. It's widely adopted, and it has its own kind of history with openness evolving over time.
An iceberg.
Apache Iceberg, yeah. developed at Netflix. It's community-driven, and it's gained a lot of traction specifically because it was designed from the ground up for openness and platform neutrality.
And the core technical friction here, the sources explain, is how they manage metadata differently. Why does that matter day to day?
Well, it matters because they track changes and organize the underlying data files in fundamentally different ways. It's like, imagine Delta's metadata is one kind of filing system and Iceberg's is another. An engine built to understand Delta's system just can't naturally read and understand Iceberg's, and vice versa, not without extra work.
Making seamless read and write across both formats pretty tricky for one engine.
Very tricky. Yeah.
And we saw that limitation initially, right? The sources pointed out that third-party tools could only really read Iceberg tables through Unity Catalog, not easily write to them.
That's a key point. And it really highlights why that Databricks acquisition of Tabular was so strategic. By bringing the actual Iceberg creators in-house, they're aiming to deeply integrate these formats.
To make Delta and Iceberg truly interoperable.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah.
To get seamless read-write across both. Maybe even letting Delta Lake operate as if it were Iceberg under the hood.
I remember the sources mentioning Databricks introduced something called Uniform in Delta Lake 3.0 for this, to make Delta data look like Iceberg or Hootie without copying it.
Correct. But initially, that uniform capability was read only when it came to Iceberg. Yeah. You could read Iceberg data as Delta, but not easily write Delta data as Iceberg.
So the Tabular acquisition is seen as the key piece to unlock that full two-way street, the right capability.
That's the thinking, yeah. Critical piece to get that true compatibility.
Okay, meanwhile, what's Snowflake's position in all this format maneuvering? It sounds different.
It is a bit different. According to the sources, they built their own proprietary format, FDN, their internal structure, years ago. Back then, open source formats just weren't mature enough in their view.
Right, makes sense.
So now they support Iceberg through their Horizon and Polaris catalogs, and they have managed Iceberg tables. But they're balancing that alongside their existing, proprietary FDN model that powers much of their platform.
So what's their perspective on going all in on open source?
The sources mentioned their view is sort of, let's wait and see. Let's see if pure open source, like Iceberg, really delivers on seamless performant read-write across all the different engines out there before potentially committing even further.
But as the sources also noted, that waiting game could be risky, right? It might let Databricks get a head start, especially now they have the core Iceberg talent.
It's definitely a risk, yeah. A strategic gamble.
And this is where the vendor messaging gets pretty pointed, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Databricks positions Snowflake's approach as creating two silos, one for native Snowflake data, one for Iceberg managed by Snowflake. They argue it still creates lock-in.
Right. And then Snowflake, in turn, characterized Databricks' open sourcing of Unity as, well, largely a publicity stunt. They point to that initial limited code release and argue it still lacks key features or, truly robust Iceberg write support outside their own engine.
It's fascinating. Open itself has become this strategic weapon used by both sides.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And lost in all the, the technical weeds, one source shared a perspective from an Iceberg creator that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Basically, that ultimately only a tiny fraction of people should really care about the deep technical details of the table format itself.
Yeah.
The real goal, the focus, should just be on enabling people to use the data effectively, easily.
Yeah, that's a grounding thought. Use the data, don't just argue about how it's stored.
Exactly. So how is this battle playing out in terms of market adoption? Who's gaining ground where? We actually have some interesting survey data highlighted in the sources.
Okay, let's look at Databricks first. They seem to be making real inroads into the database and data warehouse space, historically Snowflake's turf.
Significant momentum, yeah. Databricks themselves said their Lakehouse offering is their fastest-growing product line, already over a $400 million annual run rate. And the ETR survey data seems to back this up. Databricks is showing really elevated spending velocity, and they've achieved impressive penetration in those database data warehouse sector surveys since they first showed up there in January 2023.
So on those charts, they're moving right, gaining more users.
Exactly, moving right on the penetration axis while staying strong on momentum, well above that key 40% line.
And how does Snowflake look in that same database data warehouse space, according to the data?
Snowflake is also increasing penetration, so they're gaining users too. But their spending momentum in that specific sector, according to ETR, has decelerated a bit. It's tracking closer to their overall, 25–30% revenue growth rate. Still solid growth, but Databricks is showing stronger new spending momentum in that database warehouse segment.
Interesting. Okay, let's flip the script then. What about Snowflake moving into Databricks' traditional stronghold, the ML and AI space?
Yeah, this is where Snowflake is showing some really interesting early returns in the ETR MLAI sector data. Now, their overall spending momentum here is lower than Databricks, who are, the established leader. But Snowflake is above that crucial 40% momentum line, and they're actually further to the right on the penetration axis.
Further right, meaning more organizations are already using their new AI tools.
It's just strong initial adoption, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially within their existing large customer base, they seem to be activating those users quickly.
So why is Snowflake finding success getting their existing customers, who maybe aren't all data scientists, to use their MLAI features?
The sources suggest they've done a really good job of up-leveling the existing personas. Think data engineers, even data analysts. They've made Gen AI capabilities easier to use within the platform those folks already know and live in.
Like their Cortex managed service, or putting AI functions inside stored procedures.
Exactly. Making it accessible without needing, a PhD in machine learning to get started.
Okay, and Databricks. Why do they still maintain such high momentum in MLAI overall? What are they doing right there?
Well, Databricks really excels at up-leveling their core users. The data scientists, the data engineers, the ML engineers. They've smartly extended their existing, quite sophisticated tool chains, like MLflow, to seamlessly track things like LLMs now. And Unity Catalog is designed to absorb all that operational metadata from the ML lifecycle.
So they built on their existing strength, their natural center of gravity for AI spending.
Pretty much, yeah. They harnessed where the serious Gen AI spending was already happening for companies invested in data science.
This whole push into each other's territory, especially around AI, it feels like it points to a bigger evolution happening. The sources talk about data platforms enabling systems to not just, report on the past, but to actually take action, drive business outcomes directly.
Exactly. Moving beyond just building, say, a dashboard or a simple predictive model.
Right. Towards actual operational workflows.
That's the idea. The sources describe this shift from creating standalone data products to building much more sophisticated workflows that actively, do things, like automatically nurturing a sales lead based on signals in the data.
Or using real-time data to guide a customer service agent on the best next step.
Or feeding complex sales forecasts directly into operational planning systems for inventory or logistics.
And doing that effectively often means building systems of models, right? Where different AI models have specialized tasks.
Yeah, and you need to figure out how to make them all work together efficiently. It's not just about one giant model anymore.
It's about the orchestration.
Precisely. And Databricks is noted in the sources for really focusing on building out sophisticated tool chains for exactly this. Their Mosaic AI capabilities, for instance. They even hired the creator of DSPy.
DSPy, the sources mention that. It's like a successor to LangChain. Focus on optimizing these pipelines.
That's how it was described, yeah.
Yep.
Specifically designed for optimizing these complex chains or pipelines of AI models, making sure they actually perform well together, using things like evaluation functions.
And the sources project this out even further, talking about building systems of systems that might feed into some kind of Uber system that is agentic.
Agentic,
Yeah.
meaning it can work autonomously.
Yeah, make decisions, adapt to new information, take actions, potentially without a human constantly in the loop, at least for routine stuff.
That Amazon forecasting example in one source really brought this idea to life, I thought.
Yeah, walk us through that one again. It was pretty compelling.
Sure. So the example describes Amazon using, years of detailed sales history to generate forecasts way down to the SKU level, sometimes years into the future. But that forecast data isn't just a report someone looks at.
It feeds other systems directly.
Exactly. It's automatically fed into multiple downstream planning agents. These are systems that handle things like fulfillment center capacity, inventory ordering, supply chain logistics. And these planning agents are coordinated. They work together towards top-level business goals, maybe growth, maybe profitability, maybe delivery speed, while also respecting local constraints, like how much space is in a specific warehouse.
Wow. That's a real-world example of a complex system of systems driven by data and AI actually running parts of the business.
Driving tangible business outcomes at massive scale.
Okay, so while everyone's understandably focused on the formats, the catalogs, the core AI models, one source raised a potential wild card, maybe even a blind spot,
Hmm.
the semantic layer.
This is fascinating because the sources suggest this layer might be absolutely critical for truly driving those business outcomes with AI, but it might be kind of underserved by the current big data platform leaders.
Okay, slow down. What exactly is the semantic layer in this context? What does it do?
It's about adding the necessary business context. Pure data lakes, even the current governance catalogs, they tell you where the data is, maybe who owns it, its technical lineage, but they don't easily tell you the meaning of the data in business terms. Like, what's this specific customer's relationship status? Which contracts are currently active for them? What stage is this particular manufacturing order in?
So it understands the business entities, people, places, things, and the relationships and the processes they're involved in.
Exactly. It connects the raw data points to the actual business reality.
That example given in the source about finding customer data was really clear on why this matters.
Yeah, the idea was, imagine you have 100,000 tables of data, just raw tables. Finding the specific, say, 500 tables that contain all the relevant attributes you need to understand one specific customer's complete context, their history, their sales interactions, their service tickets, that's incredibly hard without some kind of semantic layer mapping it out.
And the sources suggest this could be a blind spot for Snowflake and Databricks.
Why?
Well, the suggestion is they might see it as maybe a niche problem or something for their ecosystem partners to handle. Or maybe they're only just beginning to build capabilities here, perhaps by adding things like graph database features into their catalogs to represent relationships better.
But it's not their core focus right now, perhaps.
Perhaps not their primary focus compared to the core platform and AI models.
And the sources mention specific companies that are actively building technologies in this semantic layer space.
Right. They pointed to folks like Salesforce Data Cloud with their whole Customer 360 approach, Celonis, which mines application logs and understand business processes deeply, Microsoft embedding AI within its Power Platform and Dynamics ERP systems, and others like Palantir, Enterprise Web, and even companies like Relational AI focusing on declarative knowledge graphs.
So the potential disruption here is if these application vendors or these specialized semantic firms really own this critical context layer.
It could go a couple of ways. It might lead to new silos of business context data separate from the main data platforms. Or it could actually disrupt today's big data platforms if their catalogs don't evolve quickly enough to incorporate this business context and make it usable for the AI tools that need it to make smart decisions and drive those outcomes.
Definitely a space to watch closely then.
Absolutely. And speaking of driving outcomes and the absolute need to control data for AI, one source highlighted this recent flurry of acquisitions. It really underscores just how central data control is becoming, especially for AI agents.
Yeah, we saw Salesforce reportedly agreeing to buy Informatica. Huge deal, like $8 billion.
Massive. Then Databricks acquired Neon, which is a popular cloud-based open-source PostgreSQL provider, for about $1 billion.
And Snowflake jumped in too, acquiring Crunchy Data, another PostgreSQL startup, for around $250 million. They're bringing that in as Snowflake Postgres now.
Right. 3 big moves, seemingly different targets, but what's the common thread, according to the sources?
They all point to this shared, urgent motivation. Companies need direct control over the data that's going to feed their AI agents.
Yeah, one source quoted the CEO of Enterprise DB saying that sovereign artificial intelligence and data, controlling your own AI destiny, essentially is the #1 topic customers are asking about right now.
And the buyers themselves, they framed these deals exactly in that context, right? Putting AI front and center.
They absolutely did. Salesforce talked about the Informatica deal creating the most complete agent-ready data platform by combining data management with their AI tools and data cloud.
Databricks sees Neon helping developers build databases specifically optimized for AI agents, especially using Neon's serverless auto-scaling that developers seem to like.
And Snowflake positioned the Crunchy data acquisition, becoming Snowflake Postgres. It's simplifying how developers build, deploy, and scale agents and apps using familiar PostgreSQL, but tightly integrated within Snowflake.
Makes sense. Though one source did note some analyst concerns, particularly around this Salesforce Informatica deal. Potential integration challenges. Overlap with MuleSoft.
Yes, that complexity was raised as a point to watch, is a big integration task.
And interestingly, that Enterprise DB CEO who was quoted, he suggested that while these giants are busy integrating these big acquisitions,
His company believes they're actually 6 to 12 months ahead in delivering what customers need for this AI-first sovereign data world with their own upcoming product launch. Bit of competitive positioning there.
Always. Okay, this brings us very naturally to what several sources explicitly called out as, well, the elephant in the room. Vendor lock-in.
It's the perennial challenge, isn't it? Especially in the cloud era. The
Yeah.
very convenience that pulls you into a platform can, over time, kind of become captivity.
Yeah, one source really broke down what they called the anatomy of modern data imprisonment. What were the key parts they identified?
Okay, first they talked about the velvet chains of convenience. You start with one useful cloud service, right? Maybe AWS S3 storage, but that naturally leads you to use Redshift for warehousing, then maybe Glue for ETL, then Lambda functions for processing, and pretty soon your whole data stack is deeply intertwined within that one ecosystem. Trying to untangle that. Incredibly difficult and expensive.
Same idea applies to Snowflake's simplicity, making you dependent on their unique features and pricing, or Databricks' unified platform embedding itself deep into your processes.
Exactly. The ease of use initially becomes the chain later on.
Okay, what's next in the anatomy? Format fragmentation.
Yes, those proprietary optimizations that vendors build into how they store data. Snowflake's micropartitions, for example, or the specific way Delta Lake or Unity Catalog structures metadata, or various AWS-specific formats. These optimizations work great on that platform, but they don't translate easily. Moving data formatted or optimized for vendor A to vendor B becomes this massive, costly migration project.
Got it. Then integration interdependencies.
Right. The native connectors, the APIs, they're all designed to work seamlessly within one vendor's ecosystem. Trying to make them talk reliably and efficiently outside that ecosystem, or trying to bridge multiple cloud ecosystems. That often means building complex, brittle, custom integrations.
And the last piece was the human element, skill set specialization.
Yeah. Your team becomes incredibly skilled, incredibly efficient, but only within the specific syntax, features, and operational quirks of one platform, which is great for productivity on that platform. But it creates this significant human capital switching cost if you ever think about moving. Retraining an entire data team is a massive, time-consuming, and expensive undertaking.
So the sources are really emphasizing that the true cost isn't just the monthly compute and storage bill you see.
Not by a long shot. There are these significant hidden costs, especially if you ever need to switch platforms.
Like what? What are the big hidden costs?
Well, data migration complexity is huge. It's not just paying for bandwidth to move petabytes of data. It's the nightmare of schema translation, performance testing on the new platform, updating every single downstream application, dashboard, or report that relies on that data, and figuring out how to reformat potentially years of historical data into the new system structure. It's a massive job.
And the human cost you mentioned.
Retraining and productivity loss. That's very real. Your team will be less productive for a period as they learn the new ropes. That downtime, that learning curve, has a significant dollar cost. And then application refactoring. You likely have to rebuild or at least heavily modify all your existing BI tools, your data pipelines, your ML workflows, anything that was built leveraging platform-specific optimizations or features.
Ouch. And on top of all that, there's what one source called gotcha pricing, those unexpected costs.
Yeah, they highlighted a few examples. Snowflake's consumption trap was one, where costs can rack up from automated background features. You might not even be consciously triggering things like auto-clustering, caching, background maintenance. Plus those often complex data transfer fees that can compound unexpectedly.
And for Databricks.
Databricks feature upselling was the term used. Their tiered pricing structure means that as you need more advanced features, maybe robust enterprise governance, specific ML capabilities, you hit these significant cost jumps. And often, those advanced features tie you even deeper into their platform-specific implementation.
And AWS.
That was described as AWS's death by 1,000 cuts. Just the sheer number of small charges that can add up. API calls, data transfer between different availability zones, charges for various microservices. It can all compound into substantial, often hard-to-predict costs if you're not careful.
Okay, so against this whole backdrop of potential lock-in and hidden costs, the sources talk about the role of open-source data formats. Apache Iceberg, Delta Lake, DB. Like a kind of rebellion.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Iceberg, in particular, is often highlighted as a potential great equalizer. Why? Because its platform agnosticism and its features like schema evolution, time travel for data mean the same underlying data files can theoretically be accessed and processed efficiently by multiple different engines.
So you could use Spark for one job, Trino for another, Flink for streaming, all on the same data.
That's the promise, yeah. Enabling what the sources call a multi-engine renaissance. It allows organizations to potentially pick the best tool, the best engine for each specific workload, rather than being locked into only the engine provided by their main data platform vendor.
Okay, so if open formats offer this path to freedom, how are the big vendors responding? This threatens their lock-in model. The sources framed it as a potential embrace, extend, extinguish kind of dynamic.
Well, with Snowflake, as we discussed, they initially supported mainly read-only access to Iceberg, which you could argue gently nudged users towards storing data in Snowflake's native format if they needed full read-write capabilities easily.
Okay, and Databricks.
Databricks, yes, they open-sourced Delta Lake itself. But as we noted with Unity Catalog, they seem to be keeping tighter control over that critical governance layer, making many of the enterprise-ready features, the stuff big companies really need, still reliant on running on the Databricks platform.
And AWS.
AWS positions its Glue Data Catalog as this seemingly neutral Switzerland, a catalog for everything.
Mhm.
But of course, its deep native integrations with all the other AWS services, S3, Redshift, Athena, SageMaker, inherently create this strong gravitational pull towards the broader AWS ecosystem. It's a different flavor of lock-in.
So ultimately, the sources seem to describe both Snowflake and Databricks as operating in this kind of hybrid space, partly closed and partly open.
Exactly. They're strategically navigating this tension, offering some openness with formats while still trying to maintain proprietary value and ecosystem stickiness, particularly around governance and advanced features.
Okay, given this really complex landscape, the vendor battles, the shifting control points, this constant threat of lock-in, what strategies do the sources suggest? For listeners, trying to aim for platform independence, trying to keep their options open.
One key strategy that came up repeatedly was the open architecture approach, basically designing for flexibility right from day one. What does that mean in practice? Prioritizing API-first integration between systems, sticking to standard SQL as much as possible, avoiding vendor-specific extensions, and crucially, storing your core data assets in genuinely open formats, Parquet, Iceberg, maybe Delta Lake, if you understand the nuances where the metadata and the underlying files are truly accessible and understandable by multiple different systems, not just one vendor's engine.
Makes sense. Build for openness from the start. What else?
Another one was about building negotiation advantage. This means consciously maintaining credible exit threats. You need to architect your systems in a way that moving, while maybe painful, is actually possible.
So the vendor knows you could leave if the terms aren't right.
Exactly. That possibility, combined with regularly benchmarking vendors against their competitors, gives you significant leverage when it comes time to negotiate pricing and contracts.
Okay, looking ahead now. The sources point to AI itself as the next big lock-in battleground.
Yeah, the next lock-in war, as one source put it. The traps are already emerging.
Like what? What are the AI-specific lock-in risks?
Well, proprietary AI models, for one. Models developed using specific platform tools like Snowflake Cortex or tied deeply into Databricks MLflow ecosystem in ways that make them hard to move or retrain elsewhere.
And training data hostage situations, what's that?
That's where the trained AI models are so tightly intertwined with the specific data formats, features, and environment they were trained in, that extracting the model or retraining it on a different platform with potentially slightly different data prep becomes prohibitively difficult or expensive. Your model is essentially held hostage by the platform it was born on.
Wow. And hardware dependencies, too.
Yeah, dependencies on specific AI-optimized hardware that might only be readily available or performant within one cloud vendor's ecosystem.
But just like with data formats, the open source community is already responding to this AI lock-in threat, right?
Absolutely. There's a lot of work happening. Standardization efforts in MLOps with projects like Kubeflow and the open source parts of MLflow. Efforts towards creating open model formats like ON and X designed to make models portable between different frameworks and hardware. And things like federated learning frameworks, which allow models to be trained across distributed data sets without having to centralize all the sensitive data in one place first.
The sources also touched briefly on multi-cloud. It sounds complex.
It is complex. The sources acknowledge the potential integration nightmare, the difficulty of optimizing costs across different platforms, and the need to basically double or triple your team's skill sets.
But sometimes it makes sense.
Yeah, they noted it can be necessary for specific reasons. Maybe regulatory requirements mandate data residency in different clouds, or you genuinely want a best-of-breed approach using specific unique services from different vendors, or just for risk mitigation, not putting all your critical eggs in one cloud basket.
And one final point that resonated with me from the lock-in section, the idea that just staying put on a proprietary platform isn't free either. It accumulates its own kind of debt.
Right, technical debt. Things like query optimization debt. Queries optimized for one platform might be inefficient elsewhere. Workflow integration debt. Workflows deeply tied to platform-specific services. And even organizational process debt. Your team's processes become tailored to how one specific platform works. All of this makes any future transition, if needed, progressively harder and more costly over time.
Okay. Let's try and pull all of this together then. After diving through all these sources, what are the absolute key takeaways from this whole data platform war saga?
Okay, first, big one. The main point of control in data platforms is fundamentally shifting. It's moving away from just the database engine itself and towards the governance catalog. That's the new strategic center.
Second, Snowflake and Databricks are locked in this intense, very strategic battle. It's playing out over openness, over the dominant data formats Iceberg versus Delta, and over their competing catalog strategies, Polaris Horizon versus Unity.
Third, those recent acquisitions, Tabular, Neon, Crunchy Data, they aren't random. They're critical tactical plays in this larger game. And they seem largely driven by this urgent need to control the data foundation for building the next wave of AI agents.
Fourth takeaway, both companies are actually succeeding right now and pushing into the other's traditional home turf. Databricks is gaining real momentum in the core database warehouse space, and Snowflake is seeing surprisingly strong early adoption for its new MLAI tools, especially within its existing customer base.
Fifth, the focus for these platforms is rapidly evolving. It's moving beyond just storing and querying data towards enabling the construction of complex systems of models and sophisticated, maybe even agentic, applications that can directly drive tangible business outcomes.
Sixth, that semantic layer we talked about, it's identified as a potential gap, maybe a blind spot, for the current leaders. And it's an area where application vendors or other specialized firms could potentially disrupt things by providing that crucial business context AI needs.
Seventh, underlying all of this is the persistent challenge of vendor lock-in. It's created by proprietary features, specific pricing models, deep integrations, and it carries significant hidden costs that go way beyond the monthly bill.
Eighth, while open source formats like Iceberg offer a really significant path towards flexibility and avoiding that lock-in, the vendors are playing a strategic game here. They're often described as being partly closed and partly open in their approach, trying to balance openness with maintaining their competitive edge.
And finally, maybe the most actionable takeaway. Maintaining your strategic flexibility, keeping your options open, it requires conscious choices. You need to think about open architectures from day one, understand the true costs of both lock-in and independence, and recognize that the next major battleground for vendor lock-in is going to be AI itself.
Okay, so what does all this ultimately mean for you, the listener, trying to navigate this incredibly complex landscape? It really feels like these data platform wars are just intensifying dramatically. And they're fundamentally being propelled by the promise, but also the demanding requirements of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, the sources make it pretty clear that the value proposition is shifting. It's moving towards the tools, the capabilities, the platforms that can effectively leverage not just the raw data, but those central catalogs to build sophisticated, intelligent applications. Applications that can actually do things, drive real business outcomes.
So the challenge for you becomes this fundamental strategic choice. Do you prioritize the potential benefits of a more proprietary, consolidated platform? Maybe higher performance out of the box, a tightly integrated experience, perhaps an initial perception of ease of use?
Or do you make the deliberate, strategic investment in open technologies, in open architectural principles? Choices that ensure your data remains genuinely portable, accessible by whatever engine makes sense down the road. Even if it means a bit more upfront complexity. Do you prioritize preserving your freedom, your flexibility, and crucially, your negotiating leverage?
Because the sources strongly suggest this isn't just an IT architecture decision anymore, if it ever was. It's really becoming a fundamental business survival strategy, especially in an age where these emerging AI agents are going to need ubiquitous, unconstrained access and control over your organization's data to function effectively.
Yeah, so maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. If the future really does involve building these truly intelligent, potentially autonomous systems that need to seamlessly combine data from absolutely everywhere across your business to make smart decisions, where is the one critical layer, the one place where you absolutely must maintain control and sovereignty no matter what platform choices you make around it? What stands out most to you from this deep dive?